So thank you guys who were here last week for coming back. It does feel like this month has been a year. Um, like I said, we are back in our storytelling space, and this week we are talking about crafting your story. Last week, just as a reminder, we covered the importance of storytelling as a craft. This week, we are going to get into the nitty-gritty with how we do that and how we build our stories. I hope that you guys took it to heart when I asked you to do your homework last week and think about the moment or the story that you really wanted to bring forward and work on throughout this series. And I'm going to put everybody on the spot because we're going to open up with those moments and those stories. But you can take a deep breath because there is somebody who has taken the proverbial bullet for everybody, and she has offered to go first, and that is Caitlin Haber. Caitlin is not able to be here with us today because she is with her son, who was receiving his treatment yesterday. But she did send me her story and ask that I share it with you guys. Um, so I'm going to read that out for you. But just a reminder, everybody who feels free to go today, you're going to be entered into a drawing for a copy of Laura's book that she talked about last week, Run to the Light. I will let you guys know over email when you get your slides and everything who won that raffle. Um, and an additional reminder, this is not a performance. This is practice. We are here because we're building these stories. I don't expect you guys to have something polished, but I just really want to hear what you're working on and what you're thinking about as we go through this. So, with that, I'm going to share Caitlin's story with you guys. Liam was born a very large baby, 11 pounds, and me being 5 feet tall, I looked ridiculous holding him. But when he was born, I couldn't help but feel like something was wrong. I would take pictures of his head and examine them, thinking it was asymmetrical. Fast forward to his 2 year wellness visit, he wasn't hitting milestones. He was only really saying mama and dada and was so unsteady on his feet. I also was concerned that his chest and belly were asymmetrical. So I brought it up to his doctor. Although his doctor wasn't nearly as concerned as I was, he said to me, when a patient is concerned, then it's worth investigating, even if it's just for peace of mind. So the next day, Liam had a sonogram done, which revealed an enlarged liver and spleen, and this is when the investigation with all the specialists began. It took 4 months of tests and specialists to get the MPS II diagnosis. As we went to each specialist, we knew we were heading towards something life-changing. In the middle of those 4 months was Christmas, and as everyone around us was enjoying the holiday season, we were bracing ourselves for the unknown. The last specialist we saw was a geneticist, and she told us, the results will not be until January, so just enjoy the holiday with your son. Those words sat with me for a long time. My husband and I were struggling for those months, and for a long time after. I was lifeless, destroyed, and lost as how to continue on. At the same time, I was struggling with postpartum from my youngest son. I had just recovered from an extra stay in the hospital from having two extreme preeclampsias 2 weeks after giving birth, or excuse me, from having extreme preeclampsia 2 weeks after giving birth. I thought I'd never feel happy again. My husband was in complete denial, but by the grace of God, our geneticist wasted no time and steered us towards action. Diagnosed in January, port surgery in February, and Liam was heading into a clinical trial by March. However, the waiting for my youngest son's results didn't come until a while after. Thankfully, he is not affected. Quickly, I went from devastated to moving through the motions. But what grounded me and continues to is every time we were in the hospital, I look at Liam, who is now 4, this tiny human with an IV in his arm or a port accessed, with a blood pressure cuff on and a heart monitor, and how much of this is just normal to him, traumatizing in the moment, but then he quickly settles back to regular life. He's joyful, not disgruntled or depressed. He loves to make people laugh and is witty and goofy. Liam faces big fears every week at treatment, and yet he still is smiling through life. My husband and I try to live by that, even on your worst day, and end it with a smile. Being on this journey has shown us what true strength is and the power of resilience. Telling Liam's story gives me a sense of pride and honor. We were chosen to be his parents for a reason, and we go through the season on this journey. We hope that we bring his story to more and more ears. The only way I've been able to get back to life as a caregiver for Liam, a mom, and just find myself after receiving the MPS II diagnosis is by spreading awareness and sharing his story. And Because Caitlin is not able to be here with us today, I ask that you guys hold any questions or feedback that you might have until she's hopefully with us next week. Or if you guys have any questions or thoughtful feedback you'd like to provide, please feel free to reach out to me via email and I will connect you guys with her. We're really grateful that she jumped in 2 feet in and was our first person to go. And with that, I will open it up to anybody else who might be feeling brave and would like to tell us in 1 to 2 minutes their story or their moment that they're taking with them through this series. I saw Kathy's hand go right up. Go for it. You're on mute.
And I almost lost you. So mine's not as long. Um, I don't know. Mine, I think, is from, I don't know. I kind of wrote mine a little bit differently, thinking as if I'm like heading to Capitol Hill and speaking to someone.
Yeah.
So it's not as detailed. I don't know. Maybe it should be. So here it is. Margaret and Bridget were born apparently healthy, just like thousands of babies across the country every day. They passed their newborn screening, met early milestones, and filled our home with love. What no test revealed was Sanfilippo syndrome, a rare progressive degenerative disorder that slowly takes away a child's abilities, independence, and voice. Like many families, we did not receive a diagnosis until irreversible damage had already begun. By the time Sanfilippo is identified, families are often told prepare for decline rather than give meaningful options to preserve what skills that children still have. This delay is not due to lack of science, but due to a lack of early detection and timely access to treatment. Newborn screenings for Sanfilippo syndrome would change everything. Every diagnosis would give families time to intervene, to plan, to preserve function, and to participate in any emerging therapies before permanent damage occurs. It would shift the narrative from reaction to prevention. And then I kind of just spoke about what I would mention to Capitol Hill, like obviously newborn screening.
Hmm.
I feel like if I can go into further detail. Like I feel like if Margaret's 21, for those of you who don't know, and Bridget's 18, um, had there been a newborn screening, maybe they would have gotten into a clinical trial.
Hmm.
21 years old is old in the Sanfilippo world. So I would talk about newborn screening and how that adding that to the RUSP recommended something panel would be
Recommended uniform screening panel for those who aren't familiar.
right. That I think is so important. Um, yeah, I think that's huge. And then supportive policies like the priority review voucher, which is huge. And then um, what was the last one I was saying? Oh, like opportunities for expanded access, I think is so important.
Hmm.
So those are the three things I would then continue to talk about that are important, I think important to everybody. But I think my girls, had they had a newborn screening, like their whole journey would have been so different.
Yeah.
Um, I think it's important to say something like, we don't have time on our side,
Mhm.
and this is why it matters.
Yeah. I
Expanded
think
access could have changed like everything.
I think you have a wonderful first draft, and thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
I think you're really gonna enjoy what we're talking about today,
Okay.
some of our tools that we're talking about, as well as next week. You kind of hit on what we're talking about. Next week, our subject is all about how we tell our stories for purpose. So
Okay.
we're specifically going to look at the lenses that we can tell stories and drive people to action, specifically in the rare disease community, which falls into a couple different places, primarily advocacy, fundraising, and awareness. So we're going to get really into that and how we curtail our stories for that next week.
Okay.
Anybody else have any feedback for Kathy?
Give it to me. I'm ready. I appreciate any comments.
And we will be doing this exercise again our last week together. Everyone's going to get to share their story, and we'll really be working through some feedback with folks. So anybody else who would like to toss their hat in the ring, share their idea or their moment?
Okay, I can.
Go for it.
And I started this like, I don't know, probably 2 years ago. And I don't have like a rough draft, but I have like notes of what I
Yeah.
want to turn into a rough draft, I guess.
Absolutely.
So I was looking at doing like an adult book and also like a children's book. So for my adult book, I don't really, those are harder. Like, so I don't really have a lot of notes for that. But like the one thing I have for that one is a title, which is kind of, I do love this. Her favorite color was her mommy. And it's because we have a video of saying, like somebody, I think it was Aunt Jessica asking Sadie what her favorite color was, and she said her mommy. Um,
Mhm.
so that's my title,
I
and
love
that's all I've gotten on the adult book.
it. I love that.
So,
Now, Ashley, could you introduce Sadie for those on the call who might not
well,
know her?
so I have a daughter, Sadie. She is about to be 10 years old and she has MPS 3A. And we got diagnosed very young. She was 3 months old, um, because she had a distant, on her dad's side, a distant cousin that had Sanfilippo, and we were in the NICU for a while. So yeah, that's Sadie. Um, but for my children's book, and this is just kind of like notes, not really a rough draft. It's just
That's totally fine.
how I work my brain. Um, I wanted to do it from like a perspective of Sadie's BFF and like how they grow up together, but at a certain point, she starts changing and she can't keep up and she starts regressing, but they stay friends. And they just have to, the way they play and communicate has to look differently. Um, and then let's see, what else do I have on here? So my little rough draft is, hey friends, my name is Sadie, and I want to tell you a little bit about me and Sanfilippo. I have a disease called Sanfilippo syndrome. It's one of my many characteristics, like having brown hair or blue eyes. Not all kids are healthy like you may be. Some kids have problems that you can't see. My brain doesn't work the same as yours, and that's literally all I got.
I love it. Thank you for sharing that, Ashley. It sounds like you got a great start.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. And I do welcome any feedback, even though it's a very not even really enough rough draft. It's just kind of my notes.
Yeah, I love that. And I'm not sure if you guys have been keeping an eye on the chat. Kathy and Ashley, Megan left some notes for you guys in the chat, so make sure you keep an eye on them. Is there anybody else who'd like to share?
I can.
Go for it.
I kind of have a lot to my story, but I just kind of wrote down the whole like diagnosis treatment aspect since this is about rare diseases. So, my name is Savannah Landgraf, and this is my story. I was born in 2006, but I wasn't diagnosed with my dwarfism until about 2 or 3 years after I was born. I was playing at a friend's house, and my friend's mom left her car running, and my friend was playing in the car and pretending to drive it, and I was standing too close to the door, and it hit me, and I was rushed to the hospital with no broken bones, thank goodness. And when they looked at my x-rays, they realized that my bones were different, and I was diagnosed with MPS 1 Morquio A syndrome. And I missed a lot of elementary school. I was going to different doctor's appointments. And when I was about 6, I had my first surgery on my legs. They put pins in my legs to straighten out my knock knees. And in 2014, I started an enzyme replacement. It's called Vimizim, and I was only with 2 other people, and it wasn't even FDA approved yet. But after it was FDA approved, I was on the news, and this was in like 2014. Um, After a few years of going to the hospital every Wednesday for my treatments, I was able to have a travel nurse come to my house through BioMarin and hook up my IV, and they would mix my medicine, so I no longer had to go to the hospital. And I've been doing these treatments for about 12 years, and they make me feel tired, but other than that, there's no other side effects. I have grown a neck, and my legs are a lot stronger than they would have been if I didn't start so young with my treatments. Typically, at around 14, with people with my condition, they end up going wheelchair bound. I do use a chair when I go long distances, and I'm currently working on getting a uh, electric motorized chair. But for the most part, I can walk, and I do post YouTube videos, and I try to like advocate with dwarfism stories or just other things I'm interested in my own experiences. and I'm hoping to become an advocate for those like me or others with my disability. And yeah, that's my story.
Thank you, Savannah. And for those who don't know, Savannah is the subcommittee chair of our youth advocacy program at the Society. So she is an advocate. She's underselling herself here.
Yeah. Can I jump in and say something about one of my interactions with Savannah?
Please do.
So Savannah and I talked when we were talking about her taking a leadership role with young adult advocacy at Society. I wanted to better understand the power of having a treatment available. And so I asked Savannah, how's it made you, how does it make you feel? How has it changed your life? She said one sentence, one phrase that I think she should start saying everywhere. She said, well, look at me. I have a neck. And then she could lead into saying, and this is why it's important. It was so impactful that the 3 or 4 minutes that we talked about the power of actually having a treatment today, Savannah, you that made an impression on me that I'm not going to forget. And if I get the chance to tell your story, it's the one I'll tell. Because you can't forget that. But look at me. Look what the difference it's made for me. I have a neck, and here's why that's important.
Thanks, Sharon.
It was great. It was great. Hey, thank you, Savannah. Thank you for letting me kind of jump on and say how much you impacted me and
You're
being
welcome.
able to tell the story for your community.
I'm glad that I can.
Yeah, you did. You did.
Well, on that super positive and uplifting note, I am going to take us into our slides because we've spent about 20 minutes, which have been a wonderful 20 minutes on this. If you still want to tell me your story and be included in the raffle, feel free to email me. It's amber@mpssociety.org. And I will still include you guys in the raffle, so no worries there. But we're going to move into our slides for today. All right, so we are going to start with the types of storytelling. We didn't really get into this last week, but there's a lot of different ways that you can tell your story, and how you go about that is really just dependent on how and what feels right for you. So these fall into kind of three main categories, and we're just going to overview these real quickly. I will tell you when we look at these slides, because I'll send them out with either today or tomorrow with you guys. When you click on each of the images on these slides, they are all linked to information about the separate examples. So I encourage you to take a look at those, but because of time, we probably won't have an opportunity today. But the first type of storytelling is verbal. Kathy kind of hinted at this when she talked about talking to legislators and advocates and things like that. Same with Savannah wanting to use her story to advocate and tell people about her experience. And this is kind of what we as human beings are drawn towards. Verbal storytelling predates any other method. We really don't even know how old it is. As long as humans have been making sound, we have been telling stories. And that can look a lot of different ways in our current age. It can be talking to somebody. It can be making a presentation. I'm telling you guys a story right now in my own way by telling you how stories are told and how we can be better storytellers. It can also be videos or testimonials. This image that you see linked here is Maureen Cody. She is our vice chair of our board of directors, and she made a wonderful testimonial for us for Giving Tuesday last year, talking about her story and why she feels it's important to give to the National MPS Society. So like I said, I encourage you guys to review that example. Likewise, we can advocate, we can tell our stories in legislative meetings, and we can even do it in interviews. Megan, I'm going to call you out. I see you in the chat and I see you on the call. Megan just shared with the Society today. She was featured in an article with People Magazine earlier today about her story. And you guys are going to get to hear more from Megan next week when we talk about our purposeful storytelling. So sorry to call you out, Megan. The other type of storytelling is written stories. So this very strange block of dirt that you see on the right here is the original oldest story to date that we know of that was written down. It is called the Epic of Gilgamesh. You don't have to read it on a rock. You can get a paper copy these days. But that story, as far as we know, has been dated back to 2100 BCE. It is very old, and so we know from that point on, people were telling stories in written language. Sorry, I'm laughing at Megan's notes. Sorry, I'm hiding. We're juggling therapy in the background. And storytelling, like Ashley wanting to publish a children's book. It can be novels, it can be memoirs, like what Laura shared with us last week. It can be essays, it can be letters. And more commonly in this day and age, it can be social media. Every Facebook post, every Instagram post, TikTok, whatever your preference, is a method for storytelling. So think about that. And finally, the less commonly acknowledged format for storytelling is art. We know that the oldest cave paintings in the world are in Indonesia. They're 67,000 years old. They are very, if you ever have a chance, highly recommend looking at them. They tell the stories of hunter-gatherers. They tell the stories of how nations moved throughout this part of the world. It's very clear as people are studying them that they're not just there for decoration, they're there as a written artistic history of the people in that region. Very cool. But it can look a lot different. It doesn't have to be drawings. It can be painting. It can be dance. It can be photography, song. It can be tapestry. If you go to England, some of our older countries over in Europe, they used to weave their histories into tapestry. So if you're an exemplary crocheter, knitter, I'm looking at you, Sherry, knit something about your story. Make your story make sense for you. That is what this series is about. And so we're going to look at it through this lens, but we're going to focus more on our verbal and written aspects. But I felt I would be doing us a disservice if we didn't talk about art. So we're going to get into it. Like I said, I will get these slides out to you guys tomorrow, or today, hopefully today. This will also come with a worksheet that will help you work through the things that we talk about today. So I highly encourage you guys to sit with that and work on that after this. And if at any point throughout this you guys have questions, just come off mute and pause me. More than happy to answer questions along the way. So when we're developing a story, we have to have a certain set of elements. And there's really 4 of those that we can break them down into when we're listening to somebody tell a story. Beginning with our characters. Who is part of the story? Who is the focus? When Ashley was sharing her story earlier, she said Sadie. But for those of us who may not know Sadie, who is Sadie? What's the context? How do we know her? Why is she the center of our story? Which is why I paused and I asked her to introduce herself to you guys. That way you had a little bit more buy-in for the story. You knew who we were talking about. You knew where we were going. Then we take it one step further. What's the challenge, the tension, or the question? What's the conflict? Well, I'm going to use Ashley's example again. What's important about Sadie? Why are we writing a book about Sadie? Well, as Ashley told us, Sadie has Sanfilippo syndrome, and people might not understand her experience. And I feel like it's important that they do. So there's our conflict. Context, just as important. When and where does this moment live? What's important for us to know about the surrounding circumstances? Kathy, you shared about your daughters, they also have MPS 3, and wanting to take this to a legislative space and talk to leaders and tell them why it's important that your daughters receive quicker access to therapies. But if they don't know that therapies are being delayed, if they don't know that there is no therapeutic element for our Sanfilippo children, it's not going to seem nearly as critical or as important as it would otherwise. So that's where our context element comes in. And last but not least is our conclusion. What did or didn't change? And that didn't change is really important for our community. You know, typically in a traditional story, there's a resolution. The hero saves the princess, all is right, the world is saved. But specifically in our rare disease community, our conclusion is that there is no conclusion. We don't have a cure. Certain subsets of our community don't even have treatment or therapy options right now. And so it's really important for our community to recognize that sometimes the conclusion is that there is no conclusion. So I encourage you guys to think really hard about that as you're building your story. About how can I leave this on a positive note, but recognize that maybe my conflict isn't solved. Before we move on from those core elements, does anybody have a question or thought? Awesome. We're going to look at an example. So I'm going to read these out to you, and I'm going to have you guys tell me which one's more compelling. So our first example is someone took someone else's lunch out of the fridge. I'm not really sure if they did it on purpose or if maybe it was an accident. It caused some drama, but after that, I just went on about my day. Second example. Dennis took Levi's lunch out of the fridge because he forgot his. But Levi's diabetic and he keeps extra snacks and juices in his lunchbox in case his sugars get low. He didn't know Dennis took his lunch until his sugar dropped and he had to grab a juice from his lunch bag, but then he couldn't find it. Caused a medical emergency and someone in the office had to call EMTs. We all had to get back to work pretty quick, but when HR found out what Dennis did, they fired him. What a day. Which one of those is more appealing to you guys? See, people, it's number 2. Because what are we missing from that first one? We're missing our characters. We don't know anybody. We don't know who took whose lunch. We don't know what happened. We don't have a real conflict. I don't really know if he did it on purpose. I don't really know what the rationale behind this was. We're missing a conclusion. We know that something happened, something was dramatic, but we don't really know what. We just know that the person telling the story went on about their day. Likewise, we don't have any context. We just know somebody stole somebody's lunch and it caused a problem. So when we add those elements back in and we say, oh, well, it was Dennis who took Levi's lunch and he took his lunch because he didn't bring his own, then we have some stakes. People are invested. There's a reason behind the story. So I encourage you guys, when you're working on building out your stories, look at this example. You guys have great starting places already. I'm super thrilled with what everybody's come with. You guys are just natural storytellers, it appears, but there's always places we can do better. And we're going to get into that next. Anybody have any questions or thoughts on Dennis and his poor choices? Okay. So how do we work towards building a better story? How do we take it from someone took somebody's lunch to being invested in what's going on with Dennis and Levi? There's a couple of different methods, and I took it down to what I personally feel like are the 4 most important things to consider. And that is our voice, our tone, our timing, and practice. Now, your voice, I heard it come through with some of your stories, and we'll work on building this out a little bit more. Your voice is your distinct, unmistakable personality and style that shines through in your story. How I tell a story is not going to look the same as how Savannah or Sherry or Sharon would tell their story. I have a different background. I have different life experiences. I have a different accent. I came from a different place. My voice is not going to sound the same as theirs. Now, tone is our second item, and that's the specific attitude or emotion that you convey toward the subject matter or your audience. And I find the easiest way to keep this in people's heads is to say that tone is interchangeable with attitude. Remember when you were young, your mom would say, "Don't take that attitude with me." And so you would change how you approach the subject. Your tone is the same as your attitude. You're not going to talk the same to your best friend as you would to a policymaker who has voted against policy that could support your child or loved one. It's going to be a totally different approach, and we'll get more into how we work on that. Now, your timing is how you pace your story and how fast you tell it. Some stories need to be slow, some need to be fast, and how we tell it also changes. If you're in a hurry, you only have 2 minutes, you're going to talk a little bit faster, you're going to move things a little bit quicker than if you have 20 minutes to tell your story. And again, we'll move into some practical exercises on that. And last but not least is practice. It's how we opened up this session. Practice does not make perfect, but perfect doesn't exist. We're not looking for perfect. We're not looking for a script, but we are looking for confidence. I want you guys to be able to walk into any scenario that you feel your story is relevant and purposeful and feel confident adapting it for that space and telling it. It is all about your comfort and your ownership. Your story is yours. It does not belong to anybody else but you. And you have control over how you're telling it and how you're influencing the people around you with it. And that practice is key for making sure that you're sturdy. And again, we'll get into that more. Anybody have any questions about our tools? Awesome. Y'all are easy. Okay, so I'm going to read you these examples again. You've already seen the original with Dennis and Levi's lunch. Now we're gonna spruce it up a little bit, and then we're gonna break it down. So I'm gonna read you out our new example. Dennis went nosing into that office fridge like it was his birthright, and he grabbed Levi's lunch because he was too scatterbrained to bring his own. Didn't ask, didn't think, just took it. Now here's the part that ought to make your stomach turn. Levi's diabetic. That lunch wasn't just a sandwich and a soda, it was his safety net. Juice boxes, snacks, the whole thing, packed for when his sugar decides to drop out from under him. Levi didn't know a thing was wrong until his hands started shaking and the room went swimming. He reached for his lunch bag. Empty. No juice, no snacks, nothing. Next thing you know, folks are panicking. Somebody's on the phone with 911, and EMTs are hustling through the front door like it's full-blown crisis. All because one grown man couldn't be bothered to pack a lunch. We barely had time to catch our breath before we were told to get back to work, but HR didn't seem to waste a second. Soon as they found out Dennis caused the whole mess, they showed him the door. No goodbye, no excuses, no mercy. Lord have mercy, what a day. Now, what do you guys notice is different about this new retelling? Can anybody pick out anything with those elements that we just went over? Anything stick out to them? Kathy, I saw you say something. Savannah?
It definitely seems more traumatized,
Mm-hmm.
if that makes any
Mhm.
sense.
Mm-hmm.
I think your tone.
Mm-hmm. And there's a little bit, like everybody said, there's more drama. There's more drama. And it's a little bit more clear whose side I took in the matter. Obviously, I feel really bad for Levi. But, Dennis, they didn't even give him a chance to explain himself. So it's a different tone, it's a different audience, and it's a little bit more engaging. It's more fun to listen to. You lean into it a little bit more because you're going, where are we going with this? So this is from that very first piece that we saw. We want to bring your story into this space where people lean in and they go, wait a second. What did they say? Where is this going? What happened to Dennis? Who did he hurt? What's going on with Levi? Is Levi okay? Because we talk about there's not really a conclusion there for Levi. Obviously, we know what happened to Dennis, but what about Levi? Is Levi okay? So we want to make your stories this engaging where people walk away and they go, I wonder there. And so, like I said, we looked at all the elements, but here's how we can move into the space and work on these pieces. So with our voice, we can focus really heavily on who are you? Where are you from? Like I said, my family's from Arkansas and Texas primarily, but also Tennessee. I'm very Southern, so I tend to sell my stories with a Southern accent, a Southern twang, a Southern perspective. What parts of your personality and your background lend to the story? How does your personal experience help you tell this story? You're going to tell your individual story with your child, your loved one, yourself, different than anybody else would tell it. And that's a good thing. You want to focus and think really hard about how does my lens, how I'm viewing this, how do I make that into my story? How do I make it sound so authentically me that somebody with no context who knew me could read this and go, Amber wrote that. I know Amber wrote that. Your tone. Again, who's your audience? And more notably, how do you feel about them? How do you want them to feel about you or the subject at hand? Because sometimes those two things can conflict. You are not always going to tell your story to somebody who likes you or who you like. But you may want them to like you by the end of the story, or you may want them to do something on your behalf, even though you may not like them. That's really critical, especially when we're moving in advocacy spaces where we may be having meetings with somebody whose policies we don't agree with. We still have to be aware of our end goal and how we want to deliver this story. And now our timing. How fast or slow should our story move? We really need to consider that. And a lot of the time, that's going to depend on how long we have to tell our story. It can change. It can just be that you feel more comfortable telling the story quickly or slowly. But a lot of the time, it's going to depend on the parameters that you're working with. Likewise, how can you use timing to convey urgency, delays, or other themes in your story? So, for example, you're saying, well, they took Paul into the hospital on a gurney. When you say they rushed Paul into the hospital on a gurney, one sounds a lot more urgent than the other. And so it tricks people's ears. When they're reading it, it quickens their heart rate and they go, oh, there's something urgent here. I need to pay attention. And they move into that urgent space with you. So think about your language specifically in those scenarios. Likewise, when you're telling your story verbally, you're aiming, whether you know it or not, for 120 to 130 words per minute. That sounds like a lot. It's not, I promise. It's about 2 words per average per second. That's a normal human speaking rate, whether we recognize it or not. The hardest thing that people deal with, especially when they're telling their stories verbally, is feeling like they need to rush. We get anxious, our heart starts to race, we're talking in front of a group, we're going, oh my God, oh my God. It's okay. Just take a deep breath, talk like you're talking to somebody you know and you trust. There's no need to rush. And just remind yourself of that. And over time, it'll get easier. And lastly is practice. And that sounds really easy in theory, but it's not. We as human beings, we're sensitive. We don't like getting feedback on things that are vulnerable, that maybe we've worked really hard on. And that's a natural response. That's totally human, and you should feel that way. If you don't, I applaud you. I'm not built that way. So, how can you practice telling your story in a way that makes you feel comfortable? For some people, that is looking in a mirror and telling the story to themselves until they feel comfortable with it. For somebody who's telling their story through art, maybe it is presenting at a show or showing it to your friends and saying, what do you think I should change before I show this to a larger group? It's really about finding methods and means that feel comfortable for you to be vulnerable before you are vulnerable on a large scale. Because once you're vulnerable on a large scale, you're going to get feedback, whether you're going to like it or not. But you want to make sure that you feel comfortable with what you're receiving feedback on. And something as you're practicing that you should pay attention to is, what do you notice about your story when you tell it? No matter how you're telling it, what do you notice repeats itself? What do you notice? Oh, as I'm saying this out loud, maybe I don't think I feel comfortable sharing this particular piece that I was thinking about. Or, oh, I don't like how that sounds. Maybe I need to change that around a little bit in my head. And then, like we just said with feedback, how do you feel most comfortable? Think really strongly. Do I prefer to have somebody redline a document for me? Or would I rather have somebody call me and I run through things with them and then they tell me how they feel? Because the thing that you really don't want to do when you're telling your story is you don't want to traumatize yourself. Storytelling is inherently vulnerable, and we don't want to hurt ourselves by telling stories that maybe we're not ready yet to tell. You know, it may be that you had a moment in mind as you were coming into this series, and now you're thinking, oh, maybe I'm not ready to put that out there yet. Maybe I need to pivot to something else. And that's okay. And that's totally natural. And I encourage you guys to think really, really hard about that. And the final tip for that is don't practice too much. Storytelling is not supposed to be scripted unless you are being paid to film a TV or a movie. It's meant to feel natural. It's meant to feel relatable. You're gonna stumble. You're gonna stutter. And maybe that just makes the story better. Sometimes the most Compelling stories are when people get emotional when they're telling them. Sometimes that endears it to us in a way that it wouldn't if they were just reading a script for us. So I encourage you guys, practice, but do not perfect. And we'll work more on that throughout the series. But we only have about 15 minutes left in our time together. This is all I've got for you guys in terms of how we actually build out our stories. So I want to open it up to any questions that we might have, any thoughts you have, or anything you'd like to see with the rest of the series about storytelling that maybe hasn't been answered yet and you're not sure if we're going to get there or you want us to get there. No, that's okay. So that is all that we have for you guys for today. I know it's a lot of information. Like I said, you guys will get these slides today or tomorrow, along with a worksheet that will help you work through the elements of your story. I encourage you guys to work on that and bring that and have that with you for next meeting. Like I said, that is where we will talk about telling your story with purpose. We're going to look at the different lenses of storytelling, specifically within the rare disease community, since that's where we are. But also, it might help you on a larger scale for goals that you have personally or professionally, even. And so I really hope that you guys will be back. I'm really grateful to see a lot of familiar faces this week and glad that you guys are working through this. Thank you, Megan. Thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of your week and stay safe to those affected by the weather this weekend.